Hello, I'm Anita Bennett, and this is LA Currents. Many Black Americans consider June 19th or Juneteenth to be Independence Day. That's the day that the last enslaved people in this country were freed, but the celebration was bittersweet because they learned about their freedom over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Joining us to talk about Juneteenth in the city of Los Angeles are City Councilman Price, Marquise Harris-Dawson, and Merk Ridley-Thomas. Thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah. So Juneteenth seems to be growing in popularity in the city of Los Angeles. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are probably a couple of reasons. Certainly, I think the unrest related to social justice and equity has permeated down, and certainly there's a greater awareness now of Juneteenth, greater appreciation of its historical significance, and a great appreciation for the need to celebrate it. And so, as we talk about this racial reckoning and a reevaluation of our values and of our history, and bringing greater equity into our society, we're taking a look at these kinds of issues, these kinds of programs. And certainly Juneteenth has been a topic of celebration within the Black community for many years. Now others outside that community are understanding and appreciating the importance and value of it.
Mm-hmm. I see you shaking your head. Do you agree?
Yes, the Juneteenth has been celebrated in the Black community my entire life, and I don't think it started when I got here. I think that's been the case for some time. I think what you see over time is the story of Black people in this city more and more becoming central to the overall narrative about what Los Angeles and Southern California is. The Black community helped build this community. It helped make it the creative capital of the world, and so our story is one that's on the front page. And I think particularly in Los Angeles, with the large amount of people that we have from East Texas and Louisiana, where the Juneteenth story takes place, I think is particularly important in this part of the world.
What are you hearing in your district about Juneteenth?
Well, that which I've heard for many years, that it is an opportunity to reflect on who we are as a people and what our journey has been in this nation, and how it can be appropriately acknowledged and celebrated. It is in many respects a teachable moment still. And given the fact that Los Angeles is one of the largest population centers for African Americans, it is very difficult to imagine that there wouldn't be celebrations in many of them, large and small, far and wide, to pay attention to and to pay homage to the high points and the low points of the African American sojourn in the United States of America. That's what it's about, I think.
Mm-hmm. Is the council as a whole going to do anything to mark Juneteenth?
Well, it would be difficult not to, in some respects, pay attention to this significant moment, increasingly so. So I think it is full well expected for the three members of the council who are African American to seize the opportunity to yet again communicate the importance of the day, and that will happen.
Mm-hmm. And how do you communicate the importance of the day, Councilman Price?
Well, in many ways. Obviously, we communicate via social media now. That certainly has been a very important tool that we use. But also in one-on-one meetings and conversations and phone calls, people are excited about the idea, and so have been asking, what are we going to do? Where are we going to be celebrating? I'm happy to report that the activities that are going to be taking place in Merk Park, really symbolic of the Black community throughout Southern California. And so I'm going to look forward to participating in activities and events in the park, chance to see friends, to have food, to share stories, to celebrate the Blackness, if you will, that exists in our city. and appreciate the moment in time that we're in and the significance of it moving forward.
And I would go out on a limb and say it's not just about celebrating, but also raising awareness, correct?
It's certainly about remembering. Telling that story is important throughout our history, but especially now, because it's always important to have reminders of where we can go, what our capacity is, what our ability, if we're not vigilant, to sink to. I mean, this is really a tragic story. We celebrate, but effectively people stayed in slavery 2 years after the time slavery had ended, after America had fought its bloodiest war, where it lost more people than it's ever lost in any war. To end slavery, people stayed in slavery for 2 years more because the message didn't make it there. Part of the lore is that the messenger that was sent by the federal government to Texas got killed on the way. The idea may seem laughable that a government official would be killed doing their job. Well, that just happened January 6th. Well, we were trying to certify an election, and so I think it's important to keep these stories front and center as a reminder for how far we can fall if we are not vigilant.
Juneteenth is kind of a look backward and a look forward to say this is where we were, and we ain't never going back there again.
We've come very far, but we still have a long ways to go.
And we can't forget that. We can't forget that. And it's important that we share that message. You know, it's not just for African Americans, for Black Americans. It's for white America too, and others, because it is an American story.
Well, I mean, I think it is, as you posed the question earlier, the present iteration of celebrations of Juneteenth constitute a pretty substantial critique of white supremacy, old and new. And so the thrust, the theme, the ethos of these celebrations is essentially to bring critique to bear that conditions are not yet what they can and should be. So it's a push to expand and deepen the parameters and the promises of democracy. And that's the unfinished business.
47 states in the District of Columbia mark Juneteenth, but there are, some states that don't. Do you think this should be a national holiday? Any of you?
Well, of course it should be a national holiday. I think the country continues to come to grips with the reality of slavery and white supremacy and Black oppression. I think Juneteenth is a really good opportunity to mark that and to help move all of us forward. Again, nobody wants, whether you're on the side of the oppressed or the oppressor, I don't want that in my history book. I don't want when history is written for the text to say I was a part of this on either side of it. And I think commemorating holidays is a way to help us move forward in that regard.
And I think that celebration is important at the national level, the state level, and the local level. Last year I introduced a motion with the support of my colleague, Merk, Harris-Dawson. Mr. Thomas wasn't on the council at that time, but I introduced a motion asking for the city to look at the Juneteenth celebration and how we should be celebrating it here in Los Angeles. No action has been taken on that motion yet. I'm hopeful that it will be acted on very soon. But I think it's important that a city as large as Los Angeles, with the diverse population that it has and the historical Black population, that we celebrate it in a real meaningful and a positive way. And so I'm looking forward to that day occurring.
You say no action has been taken. Has it gone into committee?
No, it has not. A report's being done. It's going to be referred to committee, and then we'll be moving it from there on.
Okay.
But, I will just make a note. Councilman Price put that motion forward last year, some 15 or 20 years ago. Councilman Ridley-Thomas put forward a motion to study reparations. All those things come together to push the city where it needs to be, and so that now we actually have an official commission to look at reparations on behalf of the city of Los Angeles and the state of California.
The earlier point that I made about the thrust of how Juneteenth presents itself now will not be separated from or disconnected from the discussion around reparations, around compensatory justice, and the range of things that we know are unfinished business. And so the push is on and it's ever continuing. That's our job, that's our oath. We stand by it, we are committed to it. I did take the opportunity to pose the question to a constituent or two around, do we think it should be a national holiday? And to the people that I surveyed in my scientific way responded, I thought it was a national holiday.
They've been celebrated already.
These were obviously African Americans, correct?
Declared or undeclared?
I won't answer that. So the point is, get your party on. Don't wait for permission.
That was a great story. You mentioned the protests over the summer, and they raised so much awareness about redlining, Black people being prevented from obtaining generational wealth. We just had the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So Juneteenth, is it going to become even more conscious now, do you think?
Well, I think it's up to us to push it to the fore. I mean, here in Southern California, we have Bruce's Beach. I mean, for all the talk about Tulsa, we have it right here in our own backyard. And there's more. And there is more to be done, and I think it's up to us to push. These things do not just fall out of the sky. It's because people hit the streets. It's because elected officials put forward motions. It's because folks are active and they place a demand on society, and I think you see that in a flourish in this moment. But make no mistake about it, people have been pushing for generations and will continue to push.
But now everything's changing.
It is, and I think that change happens because people push, and there are just those moments in history, and I agree with you that we're in one of them, where that push bears more fruit in a shorter amount of time than it might typically.
I came to the Los Angeles City Council in 1991 originally, and reappeared with a little more girth and a little more gray, but nonetheless ready to do the work. And the mandate at that time was that of police accountability and reform. Some 30 years later, that same push, that same struggle is on, and the heightened level of activity in terms of excessive use of force aimed at this demographic, that is African American men, is more profound. And so I'm struck by the ever-present contradiction of pushing for change, and there has been a lot of change that we can catalog, but we can never take our eye off the target, and we have to constantly assess the reality that things are not as they should be, and in some ways more challenging. 30 years ago, we weren't dealing with homelessness as we are now, and the disproportionate impacts on African Americans in particular. And so I make the point that when we think about Juneteenth, and we think about struggle, when we think about history, when we think about opportunity and possibility, it has to be grounded in the current reality to suggest that there's much work that needs to be done with the consciousness around change, but we have to keep pushing. We can't let up. Otherwise, our ancestors, those who fought, bled, and died that we'd have these rights, will be deeply disappointed.
Let's talk a little bit about what Juneteenth means to each of you. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means for me an opportunity to look at the experience of African Americans in the context of a multiracial society and mark our contribution in a unique way. That's what Juneteenth in many respects means, and that's why we plan the events, the celebrations we do. Merk Park being one example, full reopening of the Park Plaza there and all of what it means as the headquarters of culture and commerce and with an Afrocentric thrust in the city of Los Angeles with an international imprimatur. This is what Juneteenth means. You push it forward. You animate the environment for others to believe and to learn. And so that's what it means to me, and that's the project in which we've been engaged and will continue to do. We take Juneteenth as an opportunity to leverage the issue of voter empowerment. You can't disconnect Juneteenth from Selma. There's a historical narrative here, advances and retreats. That is what change is about. So there you go.
That's an interesting point you
Yeah.
bring up, because in a lot of states there are efforts underway to take away voting rights from
Exactly.
people who look like us.
Right.
So thank you for mentioning that. You all mentioned Merk Park. Are there any other celebrations planned in the city?
There are celebrations around the county. Certainly, the county supervisor's offices are having events. There are events in Pasadena. There are events around. I like to think of Merk Park as the center of the celebration of Black culture in Southern California and the West Coast, and so Merk Park Rising is the one that I think we sort of all promote, and it has on it the fingerprints of Juneteenth. You know, I remember a couple years ago, I got a little bit nervous under the collar. They said, meet me in Merk Park. Nobody had pulled a permit. Nobody had gotten permission. And there were bands, and they turned the street into a parking lot and all the rest. But it was a beautiful celebration, and it's grown from there, and something that we're more excited and less nervous about today in 2021.
It's officially sanctioned.
It will be on, and it will be permitted. So come one, come all, and have a good time.
Well, you know,
at the
it's
Merk Park.
interesting because certainly when I was growing up, you know, we didn't talk about Juneteenth. It wasn't taught in the schools only recently. And so, you know, it was sort of like self-discovery for me, you know, with friends, family, kind of understanding what happened, kind of word of mouth, blah, blah, blah. And it's just been elevated, you know, so it's in the national consciousness. It's in the national conversation now in ways that it had never been before. And so, as my colleagues have suggested, this is really a teachable moment, and it's an opportunity that we have to seize now, underscoring the importance, underscoring the impact, underscoring opportunity that really comes of this.
My colleagues are speaking in a very high-minded way about Juneteenth. I've been with both of them on Juneteenth, and I can't believe that they haven't mentioned barbecue and mac and cheese and watermelon. So,
Well, if you just
Wait, Texas-style barbecue?
Texas style.
well, if you just have to go there, I will just say that on one memorable occasion of Juneteenth, and the narrative of Juneteenth, some of the struggle has been to not have it be held historically or culturally captive to a certain genre in music, but the blues factors prominently in the Juneteenth narrative. Not the gospel, but the blues. And there was one occasion where B.B. King was the featured performer on Crenshaw at a restaurant that was at that point in time called Entrees, that had been flipped to another thing. It's the Crenshaw Baldwin Hills Mall now, but long before that was the case. This was a packed out venue, and every accoutrement to which you made reference, Councilman, was on display with Lucille.
The guitar.
That's
famous
my
guitar.
memory of Juneteenth. Since you just had to go there.
All right, so for people who want to get information on Merk Park Rising, where can they find that?
It's on all of our websites that you can find it, on all of our social media. We're promoting it, and then you can just Google Merk Park Rising, and it is very present in social media at this moment.
Yeah, and it's demarcating the transformation and the animation of the Merk Park Village on the part of the merchants who are there doing their thing, the residents there, the nonprofits, the history with the Vision Theater set to be open, and all of the new things that are happening in the village. And so Rising is an apt expression for what's going on in the Merk Park. So Merk Park Rising / Juneteenth, you can find out what's going on. There'll be multiple stages
Yeah, we'll
Private
direct
event.
people
Right.
online to get that information.
Right.
I want to circle back. I mentioned Bruce's Beach, and for those who don't know it, a black family who lived in the Manhattan Beach area, they owned property, and 100 years ago that property was seized simply because they're black. What is happening with that in terms of giving this family the property back that was stolen from them?
Well, that's an issue between the county and the family. I know Supervisor Holly Mitchell is taking the lead at this moment along with Supervisor Janice Hahn, and I know Councilman worked on it when he was on the County Board of Supervisors. But the idea is that folks should be made whole. Like, it's not actually very complicated. Folks should be made whole and nothing short of that.
It's the most forceful example of what reparations constitutes. In a real way. It's an updated version, perhaps, of 40 Acres and a Mule and more. But it's a justice issue, fundamentally. And it's translated into a legislative matter because the state has its fingerprint on it in terms of possession and legislation, and the county, and so they're moving through. But this will not go away, and not only will it not go away, it will bring attention to similar such instances in other parts of the nation. That has already begun to happen as well. So this is a story worth following, and we all have an obligation to insist that justice is done in the instance of that family and that rather disturbing narrative where there was government complicity in the denial of their rights.
And the real tragedy are the hundreds and hundreds of cases
Yeah.
where there's no documentation, where land was just taken, and harm done to the family, generational harm
Yes.
done
Yes.
Yeah.
to families that will never be replaced.
What I learned about, I covered when the two county supervisors were out there announcing that there were efforts underway to make this family whole. What I learned is that this family was denied generational wealth, and it's happened to African Americans in this nation for so long. And what that means is that this family would be extremely wealthy right now, but they're not because their property was seized. So are we going to see more instances, hopefully, of people being made whole?
We'll see more instances of that, of people being made whole, but I think the fight continues, and it's a long fight. So this is a place where people literally lost their land. Mm-hmm. But there's also the issue of redlining. All of our families, and I can say this without even knowing the histories, all of our families, when we came here, we had housing on the east side of South LA. Mm-hmm. That area was redlined. Mm-hmm. So the property appreciated at a slower rate than everything else around it. So our families walk away when it's time for me to go to college or you to buy a house or whatever. Our families have less to give because of something that was imposed upon their neighborhood. And so we've got a long way to go for people to be truly made whole. I think those are the examples that are more concrete and more objective, but they're much, much broader than that and affect almost anybody who's African American in our society.
This issue of intergenerational wealth is fundamentally important because it has contributed to the impoverishment of communities across the length and breadth of the nation. And I think this is a concrete illustration of that. But the issue of predatory lending and redlining and the like that we have worked on for many years. You mentioned Leimert Park. Leimert Park was defined by restrictive covenants, and it was only after Shelley versus Kramer went to the United States Supreme Court that we had those racially defined areas stricken. Leimert Park. It wasn't until 1957 that the first black family moved in Leimert Park. And so the legacy of slavery, Juneteenth, the legacy of slavery is real in our very lives, and that's the point that we cannot lose sight of.
And racism, because we just marked what happened in Tulsa.
Correct.
That's true. And again, I know there's a temptation to focus on the dramatic. Tulsa's dramatic. It was a military action by that city and its citizens and that state against those particular people in a particular place over a set number of days. But then there is the pedestrian racism, the everyday racism.
Right.
Every day, you wake up, you go to sleep, it's always there. It's a part of your life, and you live and die with it. That's what we have to get, and that affects us all. There isn't anybody that gets the free pass on that. I might not have lived in Tulsa when the bombs were dropped, but my family lived somewhere, and wherever we lived, redlining was happening, predatory lending was happening, banking discrimination was happening, the denial of insurance was happening. All those things are happening on a day-to-day basis, and we've got a long way to go to correct those things.
And so reparations is not just about, paying for those sins, those wrongs, but really compensating for what happened in the past and how we can move forward with it.
That's right.
And that really is a challenge.
Right.
And so
Right.
this notion of reparations is alive, it's real, and increasingly I think we're going to see levels of government taking specific actions to attempt to address the wrongs that were done.
And it's not ideological, it's very practical. It's that which is implementable. In other words, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about very specific things in terms of education outcomes and the benefits that are to be afforded the descendants of slaves pursuant to their desire to acquire higher education. It may have implications for universal income and a whole range of things that's relevant. And we know that there's leadership on the City Council by Councilman Price on that issue, and both Harris-Dawson and I were pleased to join in helping on that, but that's a big ticket item.
Can you expand a little bit on universal income?
Over 1,000 families will be benefited with $1,000 a month for a year, no strings attached. We've seen experiments in other parts of the country, and other parts of, in fact, in our state, Stockton most recently, demonstrated how these kinds of programs can really be helpful and help turn the tide. And so we're going to be experimenting here in Los Angeles to see if we can't move that needle and really identify some new ways of addressing problems associated with poverty.
And it's really appropriate on the City Council, and I couldn't be proud of this, that our council member who represents the historic Furlong Tract, the space of land that black people occupied historically at the beginning of this city. The person who represents that, Price, put forward the Guaranteed Basic Income Program in Los Angeles, and it's taken off like wildfire. I think he started with a few hundred people. We're now up to a few thousand people, and now you have big cities all over the country getting in line to do the same program. And for me, that's the example of the kind of change that you can make when you continue to push.
Who are the people benefiting from this, and how do we find them?
Well, we're putting that program together now, but it's going to be those who are poor, the poorest, if you will. We know there's going to be much more than 1,000, so there'll be a lottery, but there's going to be a process by which people will be able to apply to be selected in this program. And so we're excited about the prospects of having the largest such experiment here in Los Angeles. But as my colleagues have suggested, it really is a national trend. And we've got to figure out new ways, better ways of assisting those who are impoverished. And direct cash payments is certainly one. And it's not a new idea. Martin Luther King talked about that, in the 60s. So as one answer to that
Poor People's Campaign, Poor People's March on Washington.
Exactly.
Still having these conversations.
Exactly.
Well, we are out of time. This has been a lively discussion on Juneteenth and race in America and Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Councilman Price, Marquise Harris-Dawson, and Mark Ridley-Thomas. I'm Anita Bennett, and this is LA Currents. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.